The Orlando Magic near the final quarter of their season, why they've had 3 seasons already, and why the 4th season is a chance for redemption today on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is February 24th. It will be February 25th, 2025. My name is Philip Rossman-Mike. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD and on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, the Orlando Magic are nearing the end of the 3rd quarter of the season. They'll hit that mark on Thursday or at halftime of Thursday's game. Why the Orlando Magic have already played 3 seasons, what that tells us about what comes next and who the Magic really are, and why the road to redemption begins now. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a moment. First, I want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. No matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right we upload, we truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. You can make Locked On Magic even bigger part of your day with the Locked On Magic Daily Newsletter, the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Magic newsletter. It is not quite time to put this season to bed. And so I might be a little premature in what we're going to talk about today. Talking about what we've learned about the Orlando Magic this season. What we can glean from these first 3 quarters of the season, and what we know about this team. We do know a lot. We know that it's finally time to meaningfully address the offense. We know that this team has glaring flaws that keep it from being the team they want to be. If anything, this episode is really meant to remind everybody that the Magic are not as bad as their record is. But it's also here to acknowledge and to state clearly the Magic still have to own what their record is. As Dennis Green said, you are what your record says you are. And this Orlando Magic team is 29-30 with a net rating just a smidge better than -1. Statistically, they are their record. Just before the All-Star break, after Wednesday's game against the Charlotte Hornets, or last Wednesday's game against the Charlotte Hornets, Jamal Mosley said it pretty plainly, or was asked about just kind of trying to put the season into perspective. And he said, we have already played 3 seasons, or it already feels like we have played 3 seasons. And he is absolutely right. You can really break this season down into 3 key components, into 3 parts. And each of them is completely different. Each of those parts tell you also a little bit about this team. And as Jeff Weltman, who made it very, very clear that he believes that they need time to, maybe not need time, but they want to see this team healthy. They want to see if this team can reach some of its potential before they make grand conclusions and sweeping conclusions about where this team goes next and what comes next for this franchise. Nobody is under any impression that they can bring back the same group. We're not here to make that debate. And frankly, I'm not even here to talk that much about what's going to come in the offseason. We'll hit on it, obviously. But the Magic want to see what this vision was supposed to be so that they can address who this team should be as much as they have been. It feels like it is impossible to remember this. It feels like it is a huge stretch to think back to what this team was like at the beginning of the season. To think back to who this team was when they were at their best. Before, in the 25 games before Franz Wagner's injury, The Orlando Magic were 16-9. 16-9. Do you know what 16-9 is? 16-9 is a 640 win percentage. That's a 52 win pace. Before Franz Wagner's injury, before this team just got devastated with major injuries, the Orlando Magic were showing the improvement they wanted to see. They were taking the step they wanted to take. And look, I'm not going to say that they could have kept that pace up, but let's, for instance, that they could. That pace, that 52 win pace, would put them in 4th in the Eastern Conference. That perspective is important. The Orlando Magic had a 105.5 defensive rating. We're dominant. And even though they couldn't shoot still, 31% from 3 in those first 25 games, they still had a 110.3 offensive rating. They were still at least able to score a little bit, certainly enough that their defense mattered. Now, again, a 110.3 offensive rating, still bottom 10 in the league. We're not pretending that the Magic were fixed offensively. They had some pretty bad losses, including that loss to the New York Knicks in a major NBA Cup game. They weren't title contenders by any stretch of the imagination. But the goals the Magic wanted to accomplish, the things that they wanted to do, were in reach. They were capable of making those things happen. And while for the last 2 months, it feels like the Magic have been lost in the wilderness. It feels like the Magic have left something on the table, have been unable to reach that pinnacle again. It is important to remember that team still exists. That is the potential the Magic have. And again, if not for injuries to Franz Wagner, to Mo Wagner shortly after he went down, to Jalen Suggs shortly after he went down, we'll talk about that period coming up here in a minute, the Magic could have achieved their goals and made this a successful season. It is important to parse that out. Because, without Paolo's injury, Franz Wagner probably does not emerge into the all-star level player that he is now. There is a silver lining to everything, even if it is to expose a weakness that this team has to correct. But the Magic, I think, understand and believe they are good. They are not just good, they are that good. They are 50-win good. And while we haven't seen it for much of the last 2 months, we're starting to see it again. We'll get to that in a minute as well. The Magic haven't been able to achieve their goals because of things beyond their control, beyond anything any team would be able to overcome. We expected the Magic, when Franz Wagner went out in early December, we expected the Magic to take a step back. We expected them to have to try and tread water at least until Paolo Banchero returned. We expected them to have to just kind of stay in the race until he got back, until Franz got back, and until they could get back in rhythm. Now, obviously, that didn't happen for a number of reasons. Mo Wagner's injury was a big part of that. We'll talk about how Jalen Suggs struggled to step up to the plate and what that did to the Magic. But they had a winning formula. They had a process in which they could win games. There was no reason, despite any of their flaws that we knew about, to think they couldn't get the job done. And it's important, even as we are struggling and thinking about how the Magic get back to that level, it is important to remember that this team is that team. They can do it again. They did it once. They can do it again. And what we are seeing now is the product of players working their way back from injury and perhaps just being crushed by all the weight that came with it. Because the Magic have had 2 other seasons. a season of frustration, and a season of recovery. We'll talk about how the Magic performed in those next two parts after they got off to such a strong start. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by our friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It's simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this deal. If you're like me and you stay up late watching basketball, you just need to find a midnight snack. You can use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. If you're getting ready for a big watch party for one of the Orlando Magic's upcoming games, order your go-to snacks and meals at a discount and get ready for more high-scoring action. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. So then what happened? How did things fall apart? Now, the obvious answer is the Magic's offense sank. It went from 110.3 points per 100 possessions in the first 25 games of the year. Again, still bottom 10 in the league. We're not pretending that's great, but when you're only giving up 105.5 points per 100 possessions plus 4.8 net rating. This is the cool part. A plus 4.8 net rating would be sixth in the league. You'd be the sixth best team in the league. You're tied with the New York Knicks at that point and the Houston Rockets, two very good teams. That's the level the Magic were playing at early in the season. And again, I think we all forget that. And again, I think the frustration of what we've seen over the last 30 plus games has been the Magic's inability to reach that level. And so if the Magic play like that in the last 25 games, we'll talk about that. In the next 11 games between Franz Wagner's injury and Jalen Suggs' injury, the Magic averaged only 105.7 points per 100 possessions. They still had a defensive rating of 108.5. Everything dropped, 30.9% three-point field goal percentage. They went 5-6. Again, that's about what you would hope to see. Their stats would suggest they were not a 500 team. They stole some games, like the game against the Heat, the game against Celtics. They won some close games. They lost some close games, obviously the NBA Cup game against Milwaukee. But the Magic started to show cracks. And look, one of those cracks undoubtedly was Mo Wagner tearing his ACL during a career season. Really hurt. He averaged 13 points per game, shot 63.9% between Franz Wagner's injury and his own. Just a short amount of time. Really, this was supposed to be the Jalen Suggs show. And after Wagner's injury until Jalen Suggs' own injury on January 3rd, Suggs averaged 18.6 points per game. Shot 41% from floor, was very inefficient. But he showed us he could score a little bit. Maybe not take over, maybe not be the lead guy every night, but we saw him elevate his scoring and elevate his attacking and elevate who he could be. Valuable information to know that he isn't a number one option. Maybe you need to find a tertiary number one option or a guy who can step up in that role. It's been my theory throughout the course of the season. The Magic have too many guys who are just one thing. They need a guy who can be a spot up shooter and a point guard takeover guy. They need someone who can lift the scoring up and ease the scoring burden and creation burden on Paolo and Franz. And I think the Magic hoped it was going to be Jalen Suggs. Maybe it still will be, but he struggled in that role by himself. And his stats and his efficiency went down, obviously, as a secondary player next to Franz Wagner as well. Things obviously have gotten worse since Jalen Suggs' injury, and that is even though Paolo and Franz have returned. Orlando is just 7-15 since January 3rd. Since January 4th, January 3rd is when Suggs left the game against the Raptors. He's played one game since. There is a fair argument to make that the Magic are worse without Jalen Suggs, and that Jalen Suggs' presence has been vital to this team's success. There is an argument to make that Suggs is the one that makes this defense work. Now, Magic have played much better defensively over the last 3 games. Definitely a little bit of a refresh after the All-Star break. Even Paolo looks a little bit better, but undoubtedly part of the story for the Magic over the last 20-plus games now has been Paolo, Banchero, and Franz Wagner getting themselves back into shape. Getting themselves back into playing shape. They're in shape. But getting themselves back into the rhythm of games. And with the Magic struggling to shoot 29.5% over the 22 games heading into the All-Star break, I'm not including the last 3 games, which haven't shot much better. Defense has been a lot better the last 3. First time giving up fewer than 110 points per 100 possessions in 3 straight games since early January, since literally the game Jalen Suggs got hurt in the first 2 games after. Defense really cracked after that. The Magic has started to find their defense again. And as we saw against Washington and parts against Memphis, and certainly against Atlanta as well, the offense can get going too. We are starting, I think, to see Paolo make quicker decisions, be the attacker the Magic need, be the guy the Magic need him to be. Franz found his rhythm very quickly, but even his 3-point shot hasn't quite come around. And I know there's some questions maybe about what he's been doing with the shot and trying to fix his shot, but it's rough. It's been rough. Everyone's shooting's been rough. No doubt about it. The Magic are recovering. That is the best way that I can put it, or the way that I can phrase it. These last 20 games or so have been the season of recovery. If there was a season of discovery at the beginning, the season of I had an R word, now I've lost it. A season of stability, season of survival in the middle, and now the season of recovery. Trying to get your best players who've missed a month of basketball back into the flow of things. And it was rough. And that's why the Magic are where they are now. Because usually you have a training camp and a preseason to find your identity. The Magic had to rediscover it and rebuild it on the fly. They've had to do it without key players, without several key players, and have asked players to step up that may not quite be ready for it. The Magic, obviously Magic fans are deeply disappointed, are deeply frustrated that the team did not address critical needs at the trade deadline. That's fine. That's fair. I'm not disagreeing with that. We know, and I think even Jeff Weltman has made it very publicly clear, he knows this team is not complete. He knows this team needs additions and offensive weapons, that they need more consistent and better 3-point shooting. Just because it was not addressed at the deadline does not mean it is not a need the team understands and recognizes. The deals to make those, to acquire those things may not have been there at the deadline. Certainly may not have been there at the price the Magic are willing to pay, considering what they're trying to accomplish this season. Or what they're still trying to accomplish this season. But that's where this part of the story ends. That's where this season ends. Because the Magic still have 23 games left. They still have a lot to say in their story. And Jeff Weltman made it clear publicly, that part of this story is still seeing exactly who they thought this Magic team could be. How this story ends, what direction the Magic go, not any final decisions, perhaps. Perhaps decisions are already made and it's just waiting for the offseason to come. But these last 23 games, let's go ahead and say the last 26 games, will include the 3 that the Magic have already played. These last 26 games is the season of redemption. What the Magic have left to prove this season as they close the chapter on the 2025 season. We'll get to that coming up here in just a moment. So there is certainly disappointment. Disappointment is fair. That is a valid emotion. Frustration is a valid emotion for what has happened in the 2025 Orlando Magic season. This season will go down as a failure. Certainly as a setback. Failure is probably too strong. As a setback. Orlando, for the first time since they undertook this rebuild after trading Nikola Vucevic, Evan Fournier, and Aaron Gordon, for the first time, the Orlando Magic have not met their goals. Unless the Magic steal a first-round series, we are going to leave this season disappointed. And that's okay. Again, I mentioned this throughout the summer. Failure is part of the process. Getting to the playoffs, getting beat is the most instructive thing you can do. It exposes all your weaknesses. And yeah, we may know the weaknesses. We may know the reasons why the Magic are going to lose the playoffs this year. But it's still instructive to go through. It's still a necessary step in the process. So I know I just said is a failure. You will not hear me call this a complete failure because we're still going to learn a lot. We've learned a lot already. But there's still work left to do. Because as I mentioned, the Orlando Magic have to own who they are. They have to own that they're 29-30. They have to own that they are the worst three-point shooting team that the NBA has seen in more than a decade. They have to own that they are the team that has fallen apart the way that they have. That is who they are. But going 16-9 in the first 25 games, that is also who they are. Just as much as their struggles over the last 2 months are part of their story, so too is that opening salvo. And if there is something for the Magic to take away from this season, if there's something the Magic have to do to establish themselves, to make a statement of intent, it starts with these final 25 games, 23 games left. These final 26 games the Magic have after the All-Star break. This is the season of redemption. It's not going to change the fact the Magic have to make improvements and have to make adjustments. The reality is they couldn't play this way for 82 games. They hit some massive roadblocks, just like they did last year, but stumbled on them when they overcame them last year. But the Magic still have to show that they're not as far as you think. They're not as far from winning, from achieving their goals as they appear. As we sit here today with the Detroit Pistons having beaten the LA Clippers on Monday, the Orlando Magic are 3.5 games out of the 6th seed. With the Miami Heat losing to the Atlanta Hawks, they are 1.5 games ahead of both the Heat and the Hawks in the Southeast Division. The Magic are looking very, very clearly at being the 7th seed. We will probably have a play-in game at the Kia Center. Clear that week out. Be ready to be loud. Let's make sure that we're traveling to Boston. Like, let's, if that's what this has to be, that's what this has to be. But the Magic should enter that game and enter this last half of the season believing and confident that they can be the best version of themselves. The version that is good enough to be a 50-win team, to be the 4 seed, because that is who this team can be. And the goal for the last 26 games, 23 left, is to remind everybody exactly what this Magic team is capable of. To remind everybody, including themselves, including all of you fans, that the Magic are on the right track, that their setbacks were put in front of them only because of major injuries to major players. The Magic are already starting that process. The way they beat the Hawks, the way they played against the Grizzlies, even losing the lead, the way they dominated the Wizards, they are looking more and more like themselves every game. The offense is going to be what it is. We know it needs to be improved. We know it needs to be fixed. We know it needs to be addressed in the offseason. But the Magic are coming out of it. They are coming out of this shell. They are coming out of this poor run of play that they've been on. They are taking steps toward being the team we all believe they can be, toward being that dominant team, that team no one could score against, that team that wins the day, that steals games, that finds a way. They're finding that resolve again. You can see it. You can feel it. They may not be quite at the heights that they were last year or even earlier in the season yet, but they are getting there. And obviously, Tuesday and Thursday are huge tests. The Magic have to win one of these next two games. They have to steal one from Cleveland or Golden State. These are critical games. And frankly, making a statement on national TV would be big too. Again, Magic have struggled on national TV games. We'll see if the Magic show up. I think they will show up Tuesday. I think they will show up against the Cavs. Whether they win or not, we'll see. But I do think they play well. I do think they compete. But that's the season of redemption. That's the last piece. The Magic reminding everybody around the league what they are capable of. And the fact that they don't need a major overhaul. They need some tweaks to get better, to be a better team. But that they are still on the right track. That they are still moving in the right direction. That they're still capable of being exactly who they thought they were, not what their record says they are. In my opinion, I think they are closer to the 4 seed than they are to the 7 seed. As far as a team of talent and just as far as who they are as a team. They haven't played that way. But I don't think they're far from being the team we believe they can be. They've got 23 games left to prove exactly who they are. That's going to do it for me today, though. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. Find me on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all Philly Cell podcasts to your podcast-enabled device. You can find us as well on YouTube. Just search for Locked On Magic. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us on Twitter at OMagicDaily. And for even more Orlando Magic content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. As always, thank you for your support. As if all that is not enough, you can check out the Locked On Magic Daily newsletter, the one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Magic newsletter. That's going to do it for me today, though. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. On tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic, we'll recap the Magic's game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll see how the Magic measure up against the best team in the East. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.